Looks like we're live.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for joining our press conference today. We are going to be speaking about what the Black Lives Matter movement would do if they were in Congress right now, and what activists can do and Black movement leaders can bring to leadership at this moment. Unfortunately, Khalid Kamau was supposed to be our moderator today. He was America's first Black Lives Matter organizer elected to public office. He is at a protest at this moment, fighting against a $23 million jail expansion, and is putting himself in the middle of the movement at this time. So he was not able to make it back in time for this call, but we respect and send our love to him out there on the front lines for us. So unfortunately, my name is Patricia Brooks. I have been doing some media outreach to most of you. I will be the moderator for this event. Our first speaker is going to be Shahid Buttar. He is a candidate for California's 12th Congressional District, and he is challenging Nancy Pelosi. So he will give some information on what his current plan is and how he's providing leadership at this time. So I'll turn it over to Shahid.
Thank you, Patricia. My goal, actually, just in the spirit of showing solidarity with my allies and deferring to people most impacted, would be to pass the mic. I mean, I sort of think of this event in some respects as doing that, and I'm really excited to be joined by Corey and Semilise and Isaiah. So with all respect to our moderator, if I might defer. I'm happy to speak here too, but I would really want to put one of my allies' voices first in the spirit of solidarity. And I'll just say that I'm very glad and proud to have been in the streets. Going back to the Ferguson uprising, I will be in the streets, and I'm looking very forward to serving alongside my allies in Congress and enacting the policy paradigm change that we need to make civil rights meaningful, to ensure police accountability, to guard our democracy, and to ensure that Black lives matter. And with that, I'm happy to talk more, but would love to defer to one of my allies.
Great, thanks so much. So next up, we're going to have Corey Bush. She's a candidate for Missouri's 1st District, and then we'll return to Shahid in a few minutes. Corey?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here on this at this press conference. This is such a pivotal time. So let's just start with the fact that this is nothing new. And this situation we've highlighted so many times, but it's been like throwing pebbles at the ocean. You know, we cry out and we cry out, and people pat us on the head, and they try to toss breadcrumbs at us, and we're supposed to be fed. I'm from the Ferguson uprising. That's where a lot of my activism started. And after protesting for more than 400 days on the street in the St. Louis area, but mostly in Ferguson, one thing that we saw was something that I thought I'd never see in my life. You know, I read the books, I watched Eyes on the Prize, I did all of those things, growing up as a kid, but I didn't think that would happen. Those things would happen in my lifetime. I didn't think that dogs would be out after us. I didn't think I'd see police shooting tear gas at me and with militarized vehicles and in this riot gear. I didn't think that I would go through the things that I went through, and so many others of us. But it won't change unless we do something different. And by doing something different, I mean, start to elect people that actually have the heart of the community, that are in the community, that are soaking in this work. We've been soaking in this work for a long time. We're soaking in this work because this is the thing. When Black folks get free, everybody gets free. And so we have to make sure that we're paying attention to not only the violence of police brutality, we're going to come at this thing with about all violence. And just being a Black face in the seat is not going to do the work. We've seen that we need Black folks in these seats that are going to not only represent because we look the same, but represent in the same issues. I understand that you have unsafe housing. I understand you don't have a livable wage, and we have to do something about that. I understand. I am the people that I serve. I've been there. I've been through all of that. I've been unhoused. I've been uninsured. I've lived that life. And so now I can advocate, and that's what it's about. So I'm hitting the streets. I continue to hit the streets because that's where the people are. Where the people are, that's where we need to be. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to Isaiah James, who is a candidate for Brooklyn's 9th district, about what his plans are for leadership within this current time.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And I want to thank Corey and Shahid and Samailis and the teams of all of us who put this together in such short notice. But I think it's very paramount that we have this conversation. You know what I mean? So I'll give a little spiel about who I am. My name is Isaiah James, 33 years old. I'm an organizer and a disabled veteran. But first and foremost, I'm a Black man in the United States of America. And for some, that just means color. But for those who live this life in this skin every day, that means survival. And yes, it's that crucial. What we saw with the death of George Floyd wasn't just a single man dying. What we saw with the death of George Floyd, with that officer's knee on his neck, was the weight of America on Black people's neck. That's what we saw. We saw the weight of the state pressing down on the neck of a Black man. And what we saw of the man in handcuffs, even in handcuffs in his dying breaths, still was not violent, was begging, asking politely, please, sir, I cannot breathe. That's what Black people have been saying for 400 years in this country. We cannot breathe. We haven't been violent. We're asking, please let us breathe. But as we see, Martin Luther King Jr. said, a riot is the language of the unheard. What has America failed to hear for these many, many decades? They have failed to hear that we are you. They have failed to hear that we have humanity. They have failed to hear that we love our families and that all we want out of this country is the chance to succeed and be equals as brothers and sisters. So America must listen, and we, this generation, will make them listen. 50, 60, 70 years ago, Black people were marching in the streets and dogs and water hoses were turned on them. In the 90s with the riots in LA, dogs and water hoses were turned on them. Right now, as people march and protest across this country, dogs and water hose and tear gas is turned on them. The past is repeating itself, and America will never be healed until she makes up for her original sin, the sin of slavery. The 400-year head start that white people have in this country. Black people we're not asking you to go back in time. All we're asking is that you level the playing field. So I am very, very proud and honored to be here with this panel of guests who have all been in the streets, just like myself, fighting for a better tomorrow for our children and our grandchildren, fighting for a better future. And I look forward into delving into these issues and how we, as Black people and people of color and women, especially when we get to Congress, how we move the metric for people who look just like us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so we're starting off, we're moving across the entire country from coast to coast. And we've spoken with Isaiah from New York, and now we're gonna go across New York to Samailis Lopez, who is
all the way to the Bronx, to Samailis.
Yeah, that's right.
The only borough that's connected to the mainland in the United States.
That's true.
Yeah, Samailis Lopez, candidate for New York's 15th district. Thanks so much.
I definitely want to extend my gratitude to everybody who organized this conference. This is a very timely conversation. We need to amplify the voices on the ground. We need to take guidance from people like Corey, people like Isaiah, people that are part of the Black Lives Matter community and center directly impacted people in every single thing that we do, and people that have come through the system to figure things out alongside with the community. There's a lot of pain and anger in the neighborhood. I've been going to protests here in the Bronx, and there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of desperation at them not being listened to. We need leaders that will be able to listen to the needs of the community right now. The community is suffering. People are crying every day. People, are rightfully angry at the indignation of watching a Black man be murdered by state-sanctioned violence in this country. Everybody in this country saw that 8-minute video, and nobody did anything to prevent that murder. The police should exist to protect and serve. That's not what's happening right now. So we need to call for a radical transformation of our criminal justice system, criminal injustice system, to dismantle the threat of state-sponsored white supremacist violence against Black people in America. We need to encourage direct civilian action that informs the dismantling and transformation of our justice system, because the communities that are protesting are those that have been victimized by police violence. And as Isaiah just said, rioting is the language of the unheard, and the protesters should not be retaliated against for speaking out. We have a leader in the presidential administration that took a week to address the nation. That is what's causing all of this unrest, the failure of leadership that we have in Washington, D.C., and other leaders that are around that individual. So we need to fight, we need to continue to organize, we need to take guidance from the movement space in every single thing that we do. And we need to take on white supremacy. We need to defund all the police departments across America so that we can take those savings and make sure that we are putting those savings into domestic programs that address the root causes of these issues and the root causes of poverty. We need to decriminalize poverty as well. And we need to basically use this funding to invest in our collective goods and spaces in this country, in housing, in better jobs, in a better environment, in supportive services to prevent jail building and to divest from the prison industrial complex.
Thank you so much. Now we want to move back to Shahid Buttar to give a little bit more context about his work in California and why it's so important to challenge the current House leadership at this time.
First, I'll just say, with respect to the events that we're all witnessing and a part of in our communities, I've heard a lot of voices in the press describe the events around the country as chaos or protests. And I would just describe this as an uprising by a people who have long been denied our rights. And particularly, I want to expand the context here on in one dimension. We are talking about racialized oppression and centuries of it. And this isn't anything new. I want to go back to the very first thing Corey said. One of the most unacceptable aspects of this entire conversation is we have been having it for too damn long. And we are all running for Congress after having taken action in the streets to defend our neighbors from wanton state violence. And this is violence, predation by public servants who we employ to keep us safe. And the idea that our communities fear for their lives, rightfully so, is unacceptable in a country that claims to be free. It's particularly poignant for me to talk to Isaiah and Samuelise. You know, they're in New York. And when I hear the words, "I can't breathe," the person before George Floyd who comes to mind is Eric Garner. And I would just ask us to consider how little progress have we made in the years since his life was taken from us. And people might remember that he too was murdered on video, viewed by millions of people. And there was no accountability for anyone involved in that incident except for the person who captured the video. And here we are again, years later, having the very same debate with our institutions, with the support of the Democratic leadership, having turned a blind eye to and a deaf ear to our communities in the years since. As Samuelise was talking about the need for us to take seats in Congress, we've all supported transformative reforms to restore some modicum of justice to our criminal justice system. And even that's too charitable, because that presumes it never had any justice to begin with. And in this country, certainly for people with Black skin, justice has been always entirely in too short supply. Just to throw out a couple of the particular proposals that I'm very excited about. This week, Ilhan Omar and Justin Amash introduced a bill in Congress to effectuate a proposal I announced 2 years ago to end qualified immunity. That is the judge-created doctrine that allows killer cops to escape accountability for even lethal violence. The End Racial Profiling Act is a bill that has been introduced in Congress for the better part of 2 decades, which the Democratic leadership still refuses to support. Measures to, among other things, demilitarize the police. That's a critical part. And if I may just make a point there, we've been talking particularly about the racial dimension of police violence and the racial components of liberation in this political moment. There's another dimension to this. Even if you don't consider yourself part of the movement for Black lives, if you consider yourself an American, you have to be concerned, because it's not just Black bodies being suppressed and oppressed. It is also First Amendment rights in the crosshairs of the crackdown on dissent in our communities are not just the Black bodies and Black families and Black communities at risk. In the crosshairs of our criminal president and the wanton police riots and violence around the country is our democracy. Our democracy stands at risk, not just through the militarized suppression of dissent and police riots, but most recently, I learned last night from an investigative reporter that the DEA has been commissioned to conduct covert intelligence gathering, domestic surveillance on participants in the movement. So between militarized speech suppression, politically motivated, targeted surveillance, we are witnessing the precursors, or perhaps just the latest manifestations of long recurring authoritarianism. And that's the point I would want to make. I believe very strongly that Black Lives Matter, and I believe that our democracy matters. And at the moment, we are fighting both fronts. We are defending our democracy against authoritarianism. And that is a frame that I have not seen, frankly, many observers in the press recognize. Those of us in the movement all see it, because this is the predictable response when people are forced to defend our lives against unaccountable violence by our public servants. And again, I'm very excited to stand here today alongside my allies from across the country, and I'm looking very forward to serving in Congress alongside them.
Thank you so much. At this time, I want to, before moving into questions, just open it up one more time for the panelists to see if there's anything else that they'd like to add to the opening remarks. And then once we've done that, move on to questions from those participants right now, because we know that your questions are critical for your coverage. So is there any final words that people would like to add before moving into the questions?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would like to add a couple things that I didn't get to say in my opening. What would I do if I was in the seat right now? What would I do? So first of all, we have to talk about defunding the police. We always think that solving this problem means that we need more police and more training and all of that, because that will solve the problem. That is not what solves the problem. When we look at what just happened in Minnesota, didn't they just receive $12 million in 2017 after the murder of Philando Castile to be able to do for police training? And you see what happened. So is that the training that was received? That this is how you put your knee on someone's neck? That is the exact same state. And so that is not what helps us get to this point to where police aren't murdering Black people disproportionately, and brown people and trans people. That is not how we get here. How we get there. We have to make sure that we are ending the militarization of the police. We have to stop that. We have to stop we have to stand with that racial profiling, stop the racial profiling in this community. I think about what happens in Missouri. So our AG just put out a report that talks about how even though the Black community in Missouri make up less than 12% of the population, we are 95% more likely to be stopped than our white drivers. We are 40% more likely to be searched for contraband, even though we are less likely than the white community to have it on us. We are 40% more likely to be arrested at a traffic stop. So this is the thing. So we can't just talk about, this is how we solve the problem by, throwing money at it, because that's not it. We need to defund the police and put that money back into the communities that need it. So those go into social programs and things like that. We need to promote making sure that there is diversity on our forces. Back when Ferguson happened, that police force in Ferguson, it was not representative of the people who live there. And so that is a huge deal. Not only that, we don't need officers who live way out somewhere in the outskirts that don't understand our communities. No, be accountable to this community, because if I have to see you at the grocery store, if we want to go around to the same churches and all of that, then there will be some more accountability. And this is my last thing I'll say about this. There needs to be true anti-racism talk, because this is the thing. If it takes 25 weeks in the St. Louis, between 25 and 28 weeks in the St. Louis area for you to become a police officer, but me as a nurse, I had to go to school for years. So you're saying 6 or 7 months to become a police officer when your job is saving lives, protecting lives. And my job to protect and save lives as a nurse, it took me years. That's something that we have to change. We cannot expect to keep moving on like this without true anti-racism teaching.
I wanted to quickly add, in addition to everything that Corey has said and Isaiah has said, is really Black frontline activists that are putting themselves on the line every single day. And we need to continue to amplify and support and stand in deep solidarity with every Black Lives Movement chapter here in this country. And we need to take their guidance and we need to listen to what they're saying on the ground and what they're experiencing, because change never concedes anything without a demand. And all the changes that we've seen in our criminal injustice system is really due to Black frontline activists that are doing that work. And we need to continue to pay respect and show up as allies in that work and amplify what they're doing on the movement space at the electoral level in places like Washington and every other level of government in New York. Even Eric Garner, when Mayor de Blasio was basically acting very cowardly around what happened and the indictment, it was the frontline activists that made that happen and had the courage to stand up. So that is the guidance that we need to look to for inspiration. And I also want to give a quick shout out to our public advocate in New York City, Jumaane Williams, who's done incredible work in terms of standing strong with the criminal justice reform community in the city, and stood strong when it related to the Right to Know Act as well, and stood for police reform and accountability. So those are the movement leaders that I look up to. And that's what we need to continue doing as a country. We need to come together, we need to heal, and we need to lead with love and compassion in every single thing that we do.
Thank you so much. Shahid or Isaiah, anything else you'd like to add?
I'll just say I'm glad to be here among folks. I mean, I think most of what I'd want to say will come out in the questions, and I look forward to them. Isaiah?
Absolutely. I just want to give a little anecdote for folks out there. If you go to my website and look at the picture that's on my website, my Twitter, all my social media, it's me in a hoodie. And a year ago, when we got everything up and running to run for Congress, we had a finance director who told me as a candidate, take that picture of yourself down. You're never going to get money from donors because you look like you're going to rob me. He actually said to me, I was wearing the Trayvon Martin Halloween costume. Needless to say, I fired him that day. I put that picture of myself in a hoodie for a reason. Because me, as a 6'8" Black man, I walk out of my house every day and I'm automatically the suspect. And this is somebody who's a decorated, disabled veteran. That is there for a reason, to start the conversation that so many people don't want to have. So I say that to say that I am so honored to be sitting here right now about to talk about all the things that we have, as activists, have been talking about together collectively, but that America needs to hear. So I'm ready to get into these questions.
Thank you so much. There are two ways to ask a question. The first is to raise your hand if you are participating in the screen mode. If you're on the phone, you can press *9. So if there are any questions right now, we'll go into them. And if not, I will pose one because I know sometimes it takes us a moment to populate those questions. The first question is from Joe Maniscalco, senior editor at Labor Press. He asks, if elected, how would you confront the DNC machine that will stop at nothing to crush and co-opt you? What role do working people, both union and non-union, play in the sea change you are talking about?
I'm happy to jump in there or defer.
I'll answer that one, seeing New York City's a big union city. So, Joe, thank you for your question. The Democratic machine can only co-opt people who do not have integrity. I tell you that right now. Integrity, as was taught to me as a young soldier in the Army, is the hard right over the easy wrong. It's doing what you know is right when nobody's looking. So the world I come from, when my buddy next to me had to get sleep when we were on top of a mountain in Afghanistan, I had to stay awake. They had to trust me with their life that I was going to do the right thing. And that's the same thing that a congressional representative, that these people that we're running to represent have to trust us with their lives and livelihood and families, that we're going to do what we say we're going to do on their behalf. It's about having integrity. I don't jump unless I feel like it, and I don't dance unless there's a song playing. Nobody's going to co-opt Isaiah Ezekiel James because I have integrity. That's number one. Number two, the role that unions play is paramount. We see that union membership has been devastated in this country. And why is that? Because when the collective stands together with one voice and demands change for the people, the powerful get scared. When the 99% stand up, the 1% do not matter, and they know that. That's why they come after our vote, and that's why they come after unions, because that is the power that we have to take back our country from the rich and the 1%. So union membership needs to be paramount when we talk about standing up to big corporations, because big corporations don't give a damn about people. They damn sure don't give a damn about Black people and poor people and working people and women. That's why we're paid less and less and less than our white counterparts. So union membership, the strong collective, goes hand in hand with fighting for Black lives. Because if you remember the march, what Martin Luther King did, when he was marching with sanitation workers, and the police officers came up to Martin Luther King Jr., and Martin Luther King Jr. asked them, how much are you guys making? And they told them. Martin Luther King Jr. said, well, damn, y'all need to be out here marching with us too. Because it's not just about Black and white, it's about people, people, people. And we do that standing up for union membership, and in turn, standing up for Black lives. So thank you for your question. And I'll let my other panelists hop on it.
Elise, Corey?
I think that you all summed that up really well with the bow, but I will add this one thing too, is I think that when we are addressing, that poverty head on, that changes so much in our communities, and then it also brings power. And so one thing unions have been able to do is close that wage gap. And so I give so much respect to our unions for being able to do that, because in our communities, being low wage workers puts you in a position. It puts you in a position of where you always where that people don't see you with that dignity, and so they treat you differently. So it's not only about our race, it's also about class. Even though a Black person, regardless of that class, oftentimes things can happen to you, but there's a whole other section when you add being of a particular class and you're Black, and so, or you're a particular class and you are brown. So we just want to make sure that we know that our unions, we honor our unions in that way, making sure that women are receiving the money that they need, every single dollar, every dang dime for their dollar. Black women, brown women, that is what helps as well.
The only thing I'd add here is just that I think as we look at the DNC machine, and you look to each of us as candidates, and wonder how we'll resist co-optation. So kind of, Isaiah was riffing on this, but the machine can only co-opt people who are interested in advancing their careers. And none of us are careerists. If we were careerists, we wouldn't be challenging entrenched machine-supported incumbents. We're all here putting the movement before our individual interests. And that's exactly the sensibility I think that we need to select for in policymakers. The fact that we're doing that as candidates, I think, is indicative of the very same choices that we will make as members of the House. And those are choices to put our communities first. That's what we've done as activists. It's what we're doing now as candidates, and it's what each of us are poised to do as policymakers.
Yeah, I want to also add that it's really important to examine the role of big money in politics as well. I know that all the panelists here are relying on small grassroots dollar donations to finance their campaign operations, and that's super important. In terms of what we're able to do in our race in particular, we have raised exclusively from small dollar grassroots donations, and that's what's been keeping us afloat, because that is what gives you the independence to stand alongside the movement space unapologetically. And that's what gives you the courage to stand with voters and not with donors. So it's really important to re-envision the way that we finance elections here in this country. And it's one of the reasons that we need to fight for the public financing of elections at the congressional level and every other level of government. I know New York City has a matching program. I think that we should look to New York City as a guide for that, because big money in politics is really corrupting our democracy and affecting our ability to stand with the movement space. And I think that it's really important for political representatives to be intentional about creating a space for the movement to have a real seat at the table and for the movement to be seen and heard, and develop pragmatic inside-outside approaches that can put pressure on the establishment from the outside and from the inside as well.
And we also know, adding to that, just what you said, we also understand that that could be the difference in us winning our election and possibly not winning the election, is taking this money from, super PACs or from, lobbyists, taking that money. We know that can make a difference. I remember people saying before, hey, Corey, you could have won your election in 2018 had you taken that $250,000 that was offered to you by corporations, but I couldn't do it because I couldn't be co-opted. Not only that, they couldn't co-opt me in Ferguson, and my electricity was getting turned off. You couldn't co-opt me then, and so you won't be able to We're in this thing because it's about the people and it's not about a title or fame.
And I think the movement space, will set you free too, like looking to the movement space for that guidance, that leadership is what's going to keep you grounded in community and the values that, you first started with, in the beginning, and your personal lived experiences with, whether it's living in a shelter system, whether it's coming out of the criminal injustice system. Those are experiences that are worth their weight in gold, that keep people like us and in the movement space grounded. And again, it's really important for politicians to center the movement space in everything that we do.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go with Shira Tarlow, who also has a question. We're going to unmute your mic.
Hi there. Thank you guys so much for attending this conference. A question for any of the candidates. A new poll released this morning found that voter enthusiasm has dropped significantly since March, about 24%, a drop that was significantly driven by women and independent voters. How do you plan to mobilize voters and engage communities amid a pandemic and social unrest?
Shira, can you say your organization?
Yes, I'm with Newsy.
I'm happy to jump in here. The communities are quite mobilized as we see around us. The mobilization is inescapable. What you're observing is the disaffection of communities from a political system that increasingly doesn't represent us. And it makes sense that voters would be not so enthusiastic about a system that is, historically just been an oppression engine. And Corey particularly seized on it when she was just, or actually I think it was Sam and Lee, both of them actually were talking about the accountability and who we are accountable to. And we are accountable to movements, not donors who write big checks, precisely because of not just who we are and how we've operated our campaigns, but what we aim to do. And I would just say, I see that pattern implicated here, and I'll leave it at that.
So I'll jump in after you. Thank you, Shahid, for what you said. Polls told us in 2016 that Hillary was going to trounce Donald Trump. Polls tell us that, Bernie wasn't creating a movement when he was creating a movement. They told us that his brand of politics was unfathomable and unelectable. Polls tell us a lot of things, but again, as activists, as folks on the ground, as those who lead in movements, the mood on the ground is not what a poll says. So I understand that there might be those who would read polls, but I read the tea leaves when I walk out of my front door. And I'm telling you right now that folks are fired up and they are ready to go. Folks have had enough of this system that has been in place to keep Black people down and to keep everybody who's not a rich white man down. So all I would say to that poll is, one, I would question its validity and its legitimacy. And two, I would say that once the fire has been started, it cannot be put out. You cannot unlearn something, you cannot unsee something, and you cannot quell this movement that is ready to go. Here in New York City, that's supposed to be the liberal bastion of the country, we have some of the most repressive police force, and we have some of those anti-democratic processes that our government provides us. Yet still, we get, my campaign, I'll speak for my campaign, we get hundreds of messages a day, folks signing up to phone bank, to text bank, to volunteer for us. We do town halls every day, and hundreds of people join in every single day. We got thousands of signatures to be on the ballot. So again, I question the validity of those polls, number one, and number two, people are gonna be very surprised come the end of this election cycle of how many activists and movement leaders are elected to office.
Absolutely, and I'll add to that. People are tired of mediocre white men. We're tired of mediocre white men in office. And so if we are going to right now, when we're talking about people showing up to the polls, it's not okay enough to be somebody who had a title before, somebody who was next to somebody else, somebody who was, who's the golden child. And it's not enough anymore when people are looking at what has happened. So many people have said to me, you know what, I didn't get it then, but now I get it. And I'm so tired of what's happening to the Black community. I'm so tired of, you all were fighting just regular day, Tuesday survival stuff. And then COVID happened. And then you have the disparities with that, and you're fighting that. And then now this happened, and so you're fighting that. So now you're risking COVID, to stand up to fight for your life because you were already fighting for your lives, and then we look at who are we looking at for leadership? Like who is that we should be turning to? And this is not even just a Black issue, this is across the board. People are looking at, okay, if you are setting yourself up to be our next leader, or if you are in position as the leader right now, what are you doing speaking to this particular issue? And what were you doing yesterday about this issue? Or yesterday, were you talking about us in a different way? Yesterday, were you thinking that we were the ones that were going to rob you? Like, what were you putting out there? What were you saying on the Senate floor? What were you saying when you were, with your buddies and behind closed doors? What were Black people to you then? And so the thing is, don't make, and when we're talking about independence are going either way. They're looking at the policy. They're not about a person. And even and a lot of and progressives and a lot of just regular Democrats not are looking at a person necessarily. We're looking at policy. And so if you're not exciting us and galvanizing us to the polls with your policy or who you really are, who you are when you clock out, then that's where that comes from. But right now people are moving. So what can happen is just like Isaiah said, people are moving right now. So this is the time, if you didn't do it right yesterday, for those elected officials and people that want to be elected, especially to POTUS, need to come together and say, this is what we'll do now. I messed up before, but right now, let me get in the middle of this thing. Let me come out and let me show you who I am and who I will be for POTUS. That will help galvanize the rest of us to the polls.
I mean, I'll say one thing in our phone banking, and I really appreciate everything that's been said so far, but in our phone banking and organizing, we've seen a lot of interest in this election because people understand that, especially after the COVID-19 crisis, that the system that we have right now, this capitalistic broken system, is not impacting our lives in a positive way because our services are being privatized. There's more homelessness than there ever was before. There's more environmental racism. Right now, not having access to public housing, to affordable housing as a public health crisis in and of itself. So we need to engage in a radical paradigm shift that moves away from this transactional, extractive political system that we have and embrace the politics of collectivity, of transformative justice that centers people, everyday people in our society. So we need to fight against corporate bailouts, and we need to fight for a people's bailout. We need to attack the root causes of poverty and tax the rich and take from the rich and engage in a radical redistribution of political, economic, and social power that rectifies the imbalance that exists between the 1% and the 99%. We need universal housing, universal healthcare as a human right that's not tied to whether you have a job or not, because right now there are a lot of jobless people in the community. We need a stimulus package that also incorporates our undocumented brothers and sisters who pay into the system. So we need to engage in that radical transformative shift. And the people that we've been engaging in our phone calls are receptive to that message, because the number one issue that they're dealing with is homelessness, is lack of affordable housing, is not having access to soap and running water, the basics. And that's what's causing desperation in, the lives of people in our community. And that's something that we need to tackle. And, people have been very receptive. We have, hundreds of volunteers. We make thousands of calls a week. And people like, you know what, like, you're one of us. You know, you're fighting for us. You've been through the homeless shelter system. You've faced food scarcity. You've been on food stamps with your mom. You've watched your mom, be beaten up by a family member. So these are things that are not unique at all to my personal experiences. These are things that are being experienced not only in the 15th Congressional District, but throughout the country. And the system that we have right now is not creating a space for those voices to take shape. You know, so we need to create like a movement space where we invite people to share their stories, as human with human suffering, so that that collective suffering can be translated into something powerful, into electoral action that, you know, when we all come together and fight for it, like we'll step into collective liberation together. And, you know, people, you know, like are done with the message. And I think that I'm proud of the campaign that, you know, we're running. And I know that Corey and Isaiah, you know, like they're doing their thing too. So I think that's what it's going to take to transform our country, embracing the politics of change and transformation. And that's what the voters and the electorate will be responding to moving forward.
I can't agree more. Just to, you know, spin on this, like to try to package a couple pieces together. When Shira's asking about the low enthusiasm in the voters, that is a referendum on the failures of our political leadership. It makes sense that people would be unenthused about, again, an arena where there is nothing for them. And, you know, Sam Elisa is putting wheels on the car of the legislative paradigm that we have not seen the Democratic leadership support. There is a bill introduced in Congress by Representative Ilhan Omar that would cancel rents and mortgages during the duration of the pandemic. Does the Democratic leadership support it? No, of course not. What is the Democratic leadership prioritizing at a time like this? Bailouts for corporate lobbyists? That's what the Democratic leadership is prioritizing, right? The Democratic leadership is giving a criminal president new and expanded surveillance authorities while claiming opposition by ripping up a speech. I mean, just in this week, we've had the president deploy chemical weapons against peaceful protesters so he could stage a photo op at a church whose pastor then had to repudiate his sordid presence. And the Speaker of the House's response is to put her hand on a Bible and start quoting Bible passages. As her constituent, and I can understand why, like, some people would be unenthused. I get enraged instead. And as a constituent, I'm not interested in my member of Congress saying strongly worded statements after having been in office for 30 years and being thoroughly complicit in the policy paradigm that's driving me and millions of Americans into the street to try to assert our most basic fundamental rights to be left alive by people who we pay to keep us safe. It is the failure of our leadership that's driving that unenthusiasm. It is also the failure of that leadership that's driving so much of the enthusiasm behind our campaigns. And maybe just to riff on one point that Isaiah referenced, you know, polls are static attempts to assess what the electorate or some piece of it thinks at a given moment in time. None of us are assessors. We are all jumping on the scale with every ounce of energy that we have. And every one of us is supported by thousands of people. And so we are looking very forward to shifting those polls. That's what's happening. We have before the general election, we have 5 months left to get there. And I think Isaiah's right. You're going to find a lot of us in office come next year. I'm looking forward to that.
And just like something real quick, like, you know, our leadership right now in Congress and other levels of government, they have failed to listen to the Black Lives Matter movement. So we need to be intentional about making sure that we're seeking that guidance from every Black Lives Matter chapter in this country to inform what policies we fight for as it relates to criminal justice reform in this country, and center the conversation where it needs to be, taking guidance from Black frontline activists, some, you know, like in my community right now, some that are running for office right now. We need to take that guidance and look to them for that inspiration that we need to figure out how we can be partners with them in this fight.
And let me add, I agree with you, Samilis. But one thing I'll add to that is that there are also a lot of groups that are not Black Lives Matter chapters that are doing amazing. Like St. Louis, Ferguson has never had and probably will never have an actual Black Lives Matter chapter. We are just a group of activists. One thing is, whether you're Black Lives Matter chapters or just Black activists doing the work of of saving Black lives, you're considered dirty when you try to go into politics. You're considered this terrorist. You're considered somebody that's this rabble rouser, you know, and people won't look at you and take you seriously. So just like Samili said, you know, pay attention to those groups, pay attention, you know, because we're the ones that, you know, we've been in this fight and we've been hurt and we've received the pushback. So now we can take that. We've been soaking and turning, trying to turn this into policy. policy. And then we are the ones that plan to go there and do something about it. There's this whole other thing about, people may know what we're going through and they may look like us, but are they actually pushing? How much courage is there happening right now in Congress? How much is actually happening that's changing stuff? I stand with Rep. Ilhan Omar. I stand with Rep. Ayanna Pressley and the things that they're doing right now, but there has to be many, many more, and I'll say, if you've been working on something, if you've been in the area for a year, a new job, it takes a little while to get your feet wet. But once you've been there for a little while, there is no excuse as to why you can't start to make some of these things happen. You have power, you have a pen, and you get paid to take care of us. You get paid to do this work. So, yeah, so let's start paying attention to these groups that are being pushed back and people aren't listening to.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to move on to the next question, which comes from Muzadik Badar. If we can unmute his microphone. And Muzadik, if you could please say your name the correct, proper way, and also what outlet you're from. I think we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I don't know if there's a way to turn up your volume.
Muzadik, I'm hitting ask to unmute, so you just have to probably unmute yourself.
Perhaps he could type his question in the chat if we can't hear him.
I also want to note that we do still have some questions in the queue, and we're at about 12 minutes left on our time. So if there are people who aren't able to end up asking questions, you can always forward them to press@shahidforchange.us, or you can reach out to me directly. I think most of you have my contact information.
While we're waiting for Muzadik to type his question to the chat, we'll go ahead and go to Minnie Racker.
Hi there, my name is Minnie Raker. I work at National Journal. I cover campaigns. I was hoping you guys could expand a little bit. Some of you talked about that quote about a riot is the language of the unheard. And, I've seen some of my colleagues in the media speculate that some of the rioting going on may get a backlash, may benefit Republicans in the upcoming elections. I'm wondering if you could talk about how you think about that kind of issue.
No. So the fact that people are even talking about that, instead of putting the focus where it should be, that we wouldn't be in this place right now, had actual legislation and actual implementation of legislation that's already there been done. If the fact that this person was murdered is how we ended up getting here. And look, we will talk about how much we understand when a white student goes in and shoots up a school, or when a white person goes in and shoots up a business, and we'll say, well, it was mental health and we need and blah blah blah. We'll understand that. But then for people who have been oppressed, who have been marginalized, who have been brutalized for over 400 years in this country, and we have talked about it over and over again, and we've said with the foot on our neck, not even talking about that, with the foot on our neck, get off my neck. And then people want to say, why are you screaming? Why are you telling me to get my foot off your neck? This is the thing. So that's not even a conversation. It shouldn't matter. People want to say that is going to help out the Republicans. No, what's helped out the Republicans is that the Democrats that are seated have not been doing the work to make sure that this thing has changed. So let's go there. What's going to help is to make sure is us, people like us, standing up, doing things like this, letting it be known that if you won't change it, we will. I'm like Shirley Chisholm. I'll bring my own folding chair to the table, or I'll make a new table and then you can come and sit at it. So this is what we're doing. We're not talking about, how this is going to hurt. And let me just say, if we want to talk about looting, let's talk about 1492. You want to talk about looting and you want to talk about violence, let's talk about 1619. Let's talk about Jim Crow. You want to talk about violence and looting. And so what we're saying is fix the problem and we won't be here. That is the thing. And my last point on this, and because I keep getting it so much, we are nonviolent, many of us. Some of us aren't, but some of us are. I have never been to a peaceful and no disrespect, brother Shahid. I know you was just reciting the language that everybody else has been throwing out, but to our media, please stop saying peaceful protest. There is no such thing as peaceful protest. Protest is meant to shake things up and turn it around and give it a new face, give it a new soul. And so we can't do that peacefully, because if I'm standing in the street, that stops peace, because now people can't get through. So there is no peaceful protest. It's either violent or it's nonviolent. I'm a nonviolent protester. But if there is violence, the violence is there because of what. Have you ever been to the beginning of a protest? There have been to so many protests where we have stood out there and nothing has been happening. But then when the police start to be the aggressor, then everything goes, then things start to happen differently. If we change all of that, then we won't be in this place to even have to have that discussion.
I'll jump in. Thank you, Corey, for leading into that, because when we talk about violence and how this might be helping the Republicans, we need to talk about the state-sanctioned violence that has been helping Republicans for years, with the state-sanctioned violence of poverty, the state-sanctioned violence of no health care, the state-sanctioned violence of Black folks losing their homes, can't afford their mortgage because they got subprime loans from a bank that didn't give a damn, the state-sanctioned violence that doesn't let Black women business owners apply for loans to have a business, the state-sanctioned violence of communities like mine that are 50% African American, where we have 8 recruiting stations in my little tiny congressional district, the state-sanctioned violence of for-profit prisons, the state-sanctioned violence of pulling our social safety net and cutting food stamps and programs that help working families and poor families and Black families and working mothers. That state-sanctioned violence help Republicans every single damn day. And guess what? It's not only Republicans that get on board with that. It's these do-nothing Democrats that get on board with that too. And in particular, it is the Democrats of color and Black Democrats who use their Blackness as a buttress to any criticism. I'll tell you right now, I'm challenging a Black woman. The district that I'm running in is literally Shirley Chisholm's old district, whose motto was unbought and unbossed. And our member of Congress takes 93% of her donations from corporations, from weapons manufacturers, from defense industry. That is the state-sanctioned violence that helps Republicans every day. Because guess what? If we're going to, criticize Republicans, we damn sure have to get our house in order on the Democratic side before we do anything. So I repudiate that notion that us running, that a protest is going to help Republicans. No, a protest is going to get our voice out and get our message heard. Because I challenge you as a reporter and anybody listening, slaves asked for freedom nicely. It didn't happen. The slaves in Haiti asked for freedom nicely. It took Toussaint Louverture to lead a revolution to get it. Black people were marching in the streets and nothing happened. Even Martin Luther King's nonviolent protest, he was marching in the streets. It wasn't until the violence, the Bull Connor, sicking the water hoses and the dog, that the nation's eyes turned on their message. We would not be talking about Tiananmen Square had that brave soul not stood in front of a tank and that violence been shown. Nobody gave a damn about what was happening in Vietnam until body bags started coming back. So if something gets broken, if something gets burned, if something gets looted, God damn it, we might want to pay attention to why people are doing this. People don't do this every day. If Black people were presupposed to violence, we would loot and riot every day. We don't do that. But when a Black man is murdered on camera for the world to see, and our leaders can only give thoughts and prayers and condolences and ask us to temper ourselves, I reject that notion. Do what you're supposed to do the first time. Fight for the people. De-arm the damn police. Demilitarize the police, and the people would not be taking to the streets. I hope that answers your question.
And you know what, Isaiah? Just like if I have a sandwich right now, and I know I have a sandwich later on today, and I have one tomorrow, and I know I'll have 16 next week, why would I go loot a sandwich?
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I really love what Corey and Isaiah have just said. I mean, it just gave me goosebumps. But I also want to ask the question, where's the outrage with the cop who killed George Floyd in front of all of our eyes? Why is it that the focus is on the protesters that are demanding justice at what happened, at state-sanctioned murder? Why is it that people didn't have an issue calling out the POTUS in this administration for failing to address this country for almost an entire week? So I think that we need to invert that narrative and put the blame and the responsibility on fixing these issues where it needs to be. Because people are reacting this way because they feel unheard and they feel unseen in this conversation. And they feel that no matter how many times they put their lives on the line, that nothing changes. So we need to invert that conversation. I hope that you are taking time out of your day to ask those tough questions to the people that are in our leadership, to ask them, well, you know, what have you been doing? And why haven't you heard the movement space on why criminal justice, radical criminal justice reform is necessary in this country?
I'll just add two things. You know, one of the reasons we're having this conversation now, the four of us, is because the incumbents in our races tend not to show up for debates. The incumbent in my race hasn't debated. She hasn't publicly defended her record in 30 years. And if we had an opportunity to offer these very sharp contrasts, I think you might see very different impressions emerge among the electorate. When people are concerned about looting, they are literally putting property before human lives. And you can rebuild a business. You can't bring back a life once it's taken. And we're not even talking about a single life. We're talking about patterns and practices that have lasted decades and centuries. The theft is incalculable. And so is the violence. And it's not a violence of protesters. Corey said it. Anytime you see violence, that's state actors instigating it. And I think we should be thoughtful as interlocutors. And I would encourage those of you who have public audiences and are writing for the public to examine the facts and examine critically the narrative that is presented by powerful actors who have an interest in turning a blind eye to the precursors and casting blame at people responding, powerless people responding to being deprived of their most fundamental rights.
Thank you. I think we have Ms. Deek back now. Would it be possible to get him in for his question?
I think I'm unmuted. Thank you all for doing this and for the opportunity to ask a question. I just, for the panelists, would love to hear what kind of advice you have for those who are currently protesting to continue their activism, and how can folks remain involved even when there are no more mass protests on the streets? And if you can share some of the lessons you have learned from your own experiences and your own activism that has brought you here.
Can you identify yourself as well, please?
Yes, Musaddiq Badar with CBS News.
Musaddiq, thank you for your question. So I would say the way we stay involved is just that, to stay involved. At 5 o'clock, when the workday is over, big companies are still deciding which Black and brown communities to carve up. Police officers are deciding which Black man to stop and frisk, which Black woman to pull out of her car to take to jail. They don't stop, so we don't stop. Every one of us who's talking, who's listening, who might be a reporter for whatever news organization, if we truly care about this, we know 10 people that care about this, and they know 10 people that care about this. When you start a fire, you don't start a giant, massive blaze. You start a small fire and it builds. Nobody was ever born on the top of Mount Everest. They get there one step at a time. This is not just a moment in time, even though it may seem like it. This is a movement in time that will be remembered all throughout American and world history. And we capture that, and we have to realize that we are just pieces in this engine of change. We have to keep going. We keep going by keep going. It's just that simple. The road is long and the burden is heavy. But if you truly believe, as I do, in what you're fighting for and why you are doing it, you do not stop. You keep going. So I hope that answers your question from my part.
I'll say, as far as staying in the fight right now, absolutely. Everything that Brother Isaiah just said, stay in the fight. And the thing is, when you do this, though, you have to know your mission. You have to know the reason why you're fighting. We didn't stand on those streets throughout Ferguson and the St. Louis area for over 400 days, rain, sleet, hell no, we won't go. We didn't do that because we just wanted to be seen, because the cameras were long gone. CBS News, you all were long gone, but we stayed out there because we had a mission. Our mission was, y'all gonna stop killing us, and I'm saying it that way because that is the thing. This is who we are. You're going to accept us the way that we are. We shouldn't have to change and assimilate and be somebody else. We should have to look like you or act like you or be like you or do what you think that we should do. We are who we are, and with that uniqueness that we have, you will stop killing us. And so that's why we kept standing up and standing out and speaking out. And so for those that are protesting now, what are your demands? Have your demands and your mission clear, so that helps you to get up and go back out again. It helps you when they taunt you and terrorize you, and it helps you when you're traumatized. It helps you when everybody is talking bad things about you, but you know that in your heart, you're only doing good and you're trying to save the world. You're trying to save your community. So you keep moving forward. You bandage yourself up and you get back and you go back, because the thing is, your work today affects 10 years from now. Your work today affects 30 years from now. And one day on the street, out there protesting, you might have just saved a life. You might have had made a police officer think twice about what they were about to do. You changed a life just by being there, showing up, using your feet, your hands, and your mouth. So stand up and keep standing strong. Fight until you get your demands met. I know one thing for us, one of my demands, like I said before, is defunding the police. Making sure that police officers aren't being able to, you can't have misconduct or excessive force investigation on this side, and then now I'm going to go work at this police force, like knowing exactly what you're going for. And then once the protests are all done, once all of that has settled, soak into then what it is that you are trying to accomplish now, because movements move, they morph, they change, and they go. Because what I was before, I never thought about politics before I ended up going into politics. That was my road. Some people opened organizations. Some people doing search and rescue. So many people are doing different things out of the Ferguson uprising, and we lost lives. We lost actual lives. 6 of our protesters are dead right now. Figure out what that thing is, what that you need to do in your city, your town, your district, your state, and push that forward. Activists are activists because they stay active, not because they're.
I'm going to share just a narrow point before turning back to Samuelise, because I'd like my thought here not to be the last word on the subject, but just a narrow one. Musaddiq was asking about guidance to activists. And one thing I'd say is that we have antidotes to despair. I think despair and disillusion are among our greatest challenges at the moment. And one of the antidotes to them is action. And there's another antidote to despair, and that is community. And one of the unique challenges of this moment is that we don't only have a crisis in police accountability and civil rights, we also have an economic crisis. We also have a pandemic happening, which makes it really hard for people, I think, to build community, at least in real live space. So all that is to say, we are, as movements, I think, increasingly looking for and embracing digital alternatives to try to create opportunities for connection, and that community building part of the work is inescapably important. That is what enables the sustainability to run up a hill. And here I would just shout out some work. Before running for office, I had a chance to work at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and many groups around the country have provided digital security tools. And here I'm just making the point, as we prepare for the next wave, to inoculate ourselves as communities of resistance by embracing digital security as a praxis to keep ourselves, our supporters, and our neighbors and community members safe. There are lots of tools out there that can help ensure that digital spaces don't become vulnerable spaces. And I just invite people to check out those kinds of tools. I can point to different resources. The Security Education Companion and the Surveillance Self-Defense Guide are some. There's a long praxis there that people can embrace, but I just cite digital security as one piece of armor that organizers can investigate and explore and put in place to help ensure the long-term viability of our movements.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next questions from Linda Perry at WBAI in New York. I was trying to unmute her, but I'll just read her question. She says, do you have any problem with how Governor Cuomo's handling the COVID crisis, which has affected so many communities of color? So let's go to Samuelise and then Isaiah, and then next question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been getting this question asked a lot in different interviews. So one of the things that I feel has been really devastating is the fact that in the pandemic, Medicaid has been cut in a pandemic. There's a lot of people in the community that rely on Medicaid to get access to healthcare, and that's been a travesty. One of the other criticism that I have of how this pandemic has been handled is the lack of emphasis on leaning on the scientific community and the medical community. It almost seems like, Cuomo and de Blasio have put themselves at the front lines of this crisis without paying attention to or centering the medical and the scientific community. Like there was an article that came out in Seattle in terms of how Seattle handled the crisis and how they were able to handle the crisis, ended up saving hundreds and thousands of lives compared to New York. And it's because they prioritize the medical community, the scientific community, and everything that they do. And they did not permit politicians to be in front of the crisis. So that is definitely a criticism that me and so many other people have in the community. And if it had been done the way that Seattle had done it, I think that we would have seen less loss of life in New York. I mean, I live in a community right now that's the epicenter of the coronavirus epidemic. I live in front of Bronx Lebanon Hospital, and all I hear every day are sirens. And it's really traumatic. Like, people are scared. People cope listening to music in their apartments, blasting music, to help them cope with this crisis. And a lot of them feel like if they go to the hospital, they're going to get a huge medical bill. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the community don't know that Governor Cuomo instituted these cuts to Medicaid and other austere measures as well. It's almost like disaster capitalism is taking a hold on us in this crisis, and it's paving a way for speculative real estate to come in and buy out our communities and buy out like our housing stock. So we need to prevent disaster capitalism from taking a hold on our communities, and we need to call out the leaders that are allowing that to happen, taking advantage of the fact that we're disoriented right now and that we're struggling between life and death and having food at the table or not, what have you. And we need representatives that are going to fight for working people and that are going to prioritize science and the medical community in terms of how we handle this crisis moving forward in a way that I haven't seen, be handled in New York.
Thank you, Semalis. That was a very powerful and great answer. So the question was, do we have a problem with how Governor Cuomo is handling of the COVID crisis, which has affected so many communities of color? I think it's a very poignant question to ask to this group of this panelist, because myself and Semalis are running in districts that literally have been hit the hardest by COVID-19, up in Bronx 15 and down here in New York 9. Both are predominantly communities of color. So when the storm is coming, do you blame the storm that you know is coming, or do you blame those who didn't buttress the levees when they break? I blame those who didn't buttress the levees, because we know storms are always coming. Right now, it was just reported in the New York Times that $400 million has been cut from funding for hospitals in New York. That's during the COVID crisis. That is during this global pandemic. We're still finding ways to impose austerity upon hospitals, but yet the NYPD's budget is increased and increased. Governor Cuomo, from the beginning of the crisis in early March, late February, they told us that, nothing's going to happen. New Yorkers should just live their lives the way they live their lives. Misinformation, which literally got thousands of people sick from their lack of preparedness when setting up testing sites, especially in poor communities and communities of color, where people walking around infecting people. The lack of communication when him and Mayor de Blasio were fighting, should we close schools? Teachers were getting sick and children were getting sick. The lack of preparedness when it came to shutting down the damn state, because we saw this global pandemic sweeping our way and we did not brace ourselves for this tide that was coming. Yes, as saying in the military, attitude reflects leadership. As somebody who has led soldiers in combat 3 times on 3 separate fields of battle, I know that the buck stops at the top. It stops with those who are in charge. And we have somebody in Governor Cuomo who has failed us. And I give credit where credit is due. He has done some things right, but he has done many, many things wrong that could have saved thousands and thousands of lives had we done them when they needed to be done. Right now, his focus should be on putting as much money into hospitals, back into Medicare, canceling all rent until this crisis is over, putting a moratorium on mortgages, all those things that help poor people and Black people and working people and small business owners, not giving tax cuts to big businesses. That's what his focus should be on. So he has done some things right, and I'll give him that, but he has done a lot of things wrong. And had we done those things right, we could have saved thousands of more lives across this city, across my district and Semele's district, and across this state.
Okay, let's go to Muzadik. Muzadik, I'm trying to unmute you. If you just accept that, I can let you ask your question.
I asked my question, so I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll go to a question from Joe from Labor Press, who may not be here anymore, but he wrote his question. Joe Maniscalco, senior editor, Labor Press. If elected, how would you confront the DNC machine that will stop at nothing to crush and co-opt you? What role do working people, both union and non-union, play? Was this question already asked?
Yeah, we did this one already.
It was, yeah.
Okay, sure. Then let's go to a question from the public. We have a question from the public live stream, which is, what I want to know are these candidates going to call out their own leadership on corruption and not just the Republicans, specifically on Pelosi and Schumer? We'll go to Shahid for that, since he's running against Pelosi.
Yeah, absolutely. I call out Pelosi all the time. And just to be clear here, I think a lot of people are aware that our criminal president is waging an all-out assault on our republic and our people. That much is clear. What is less clear but equally true is that the leadership of the Democratic Party is actively complicit. Nancy Pelosi, while mouthing resistance to our criminal president, has actively supported his military budget, his concentration camps, his corporate trade policy, his foreign policy, his fiscal austerity rules, slow-walked an impeachment process, affirmatively limited it to ensure that he stayed in office. Nancy Pelosi has showed up to resist Donald Trump like a boxer throwing a fight. And that is absolutely unacceptable. To a very large extent, I think of our races as referenda on the failures of the corporate Democratic establishment to mount either real resistance to fascism rising, or even merely to articulate a meaningful difference from the corporate rule that has long been killing us. And, we're here today talking about a crisis in state violence and police accountability. Before that, there was the pandemic, and before that was the climate catastrophe. We've been facing existential risks going back for years, and the corporate rule on which the Democratic Party is actively complicit is a big part of the reason why. And we're running because Republicans are obviously building an attempt to institute fascism in the United States, and it is the complicity of corporate Democrats that enables them. And I'm absolutely willing to call out the corruption on the Democratic side. And I think it's crucial that we uproot it and replace those voices, usher in a generational change in order to defend the future from the failures of our predatory past.
I'd like to jump in as well. Thank you, Shahid. So I have actually been organizing in my local community to create independent grassroots political power for the past few years now. The district that I'm running in, it's the bluest county in the entire country. And it's the one that's been the most heavily dominated by the vestiges of Tammany Hall style politics, from way back in the day, hundreds of years ago, that still, has a presence in the way that our politics is conducted, and the patronage that exists, and, the insider nature of our politics. So I've been organizing on the ground through collectives that I helped co-found, like Bronx Progressives, like Local Democrats of New York, to raise awareness about the need for communities to take back our local politics and to organize and to identify people that are activists on the ground, that are experts in the issues that our communities are going through, so that they can run for local party positions, county committee, district leader, state committee, county leader, because we have to not only wage, a fight against these oppressive forces from the outside, through the movement space, but we also have to transform the institutions from within as well. And this is a war on two fronts. So basically, we need to organize and mobilize and identify hundreds of people to be involved in local politics from the ground up, from the lowest party level position to the highest one, in addition to running for Congress and other positions like assembly and even president, right? Everything starts local. So what we see is that when people are educated about the structure of the respective party that they belong to, they get motivated, their eyes get wide open, and they learn how to wield power within the party structure. I think that as a leftist space, we need to also learn how to wield that kind of power so that we can transform our parties, from the inside out. And we also have to get serious about building a movement outside of the two-party system as well, because these two parties are monopolizing our politics and our way of life and our democracy as we know it. So, that's something else that we should explore. So I would leave it at that. We need to engage in an inside strategy to transform our parties from within, and we need to educate people about the structure of the Democratic Party so that they could, change things, so that they can change the rules of their parties. And again, that's something that I've been intimately doing at the hyper local level that I feel like, as progressives, we should amplify at the national level. And I want to give a shout out to Bernie Sanders because, I'm so glad that he has stepped up to run for president, and he's been so consistent in all of his years in office. Because he was someone who inspired me, to run for office and to run for things like county committee and to, reform my local party structure. So these are the things that we need to continue to amplify moving forward at every level of government. And I also want to say real quick that we can get rid of the POTUS that we have right now, but still the systems of oppression that we have and the corruption and the lack of the fact that the Democratic Party is not as vocal is something that will continue to happen as well because of the big money in politics and corporate lobbyists that own our politics. So again, we need a people's bailout. We need a people's revolution that takes back our politics so that it could be more reflective of the values, priorities, and needs of the communities that we're fighting for.
Similar to that, there is an effort going on right now along the ways of Bernie Sanders called the Once Again PAC, and they're doing a similar type of conference this weekend that will be more open up to the public, which Shahid will be on June 8th to talk about that more. So if people want to get more information on that, you can contact me. But in the meantime, I want to be very conscious of our time because there are so many things going on right now, and we all have places to be fighting in this movement and making progressive change. So at this time, I want to ask that each candidate perhaps give one final closing statement, and then we will adjourn for this time. And if you have any additional questions, again, feel free to reach out either to myself, and you probably have my contact information already, or press@shahidforchange.us. It's a good email as well. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and start with Shahid for a closing remark.
Thanks, Patricia. I'm really excited to be part of this group, and I'm excited to serve alongside each of these inspired voices in Congress. We need change desperately. Our communities are declaring that in no uncertain terms. I'm looking forward to being on the street later today, and we'll continue to be a part of and spokespeople for and supporters of this movement. and the intersectional movements for justice to fight not only for Black lives and the preservation of our democracy in the face of rising fascism, but each of the different needs and values that you've heard about today: housing for all, climate justice, meaningful opportunities for everyone in our society. The response to these moments, we are obviously living through a grim time in our history with a great many crises compounding each other. And in this moment of crisis, the activation of our communities in coming together to assert our collective needs is, to me, very inspiring. And I'm excited to be a candidate in this moment in history. I'm grateful for all of the thousands of people around the country supporting our campaign and each of those of our allies here today. And I would say that even if only to ensure as minimal a commitment that Americans can make it home safe and not be arbitrarily murdered by our public servants. We need change in policy to make that happen. We need change in policy makers to make that happen. And I'm proud to be a part of that movement.
Thanks. Corey?
So, you know, there was a lot of information that we tossed out, but we couldn't get everything out. So I would ask for people to, if you have other questions, make sure that you go check out my website at coribush.org, CORIBUSH.org. I'm the good Bush. And one thing that I've heard a lot about is I've heard people say, you know, I know that you're an activist, but, you know, now you got to switch over to politics and you got to be this, you know, but I can't be that. You know, I'm going in as an activist that would like to go to make more change. And so that activist is fighting to get to Congress so that she can fight for you. I won't. So people tell me to get off the streets, you're running for Congress, get out of the street. You shouldn't be in the street because you're running for Congress. I'm going to be Corey. And that is the thing. I'm not going to change who you see now. That's the fighter. I'm going to be there, because the other side of that is Black lives are lost. Brown lives are lost. Kids are in cages. We don't have adequate housing. We don't have a livable wage. That is the side, you know, we're burdened with medical debt and student debt. We don't have health care. That's the other side of it. So this is the Corey that you get on this side and on that side. I'm going to fight for us until we get what we need. And so I'm asking for everyone to pay attention. There are so many Black women that are running right now, and I got to highlight the Black women. And I'm saying that because we are asked about our vote. People expect us to show up to vote, but they don't expect us or want us to lead. You know, and so please vet us. Look up to see if there are Black women running. Vet Black women when we run. Don't just take us because we are Black. And I'm not saying that, or because we're a woman. Vet us, see who we are, and then push that forward. Because this is and my last point. In 2018, check the record. Black women received the least amount of money in donations than anybody on the planet. And it's not because we're not qualified or because we're not good, we're not worth it. It's just because people don't see us enough as the leader. It's time to make that change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to Isaiah.
I want to thank my brother Shahid and my sisters Corey and Semelis for being here with us. This truly was an honor, you know, to talk about. This is just a microcosm of the things that we need to talk about in this country, you know. And I come to you, those who are watching right now, as the 7th generation of crimes committed. That's who I am as a Black man in America in this time, you know. And America has done some great things. We put a man on the moon. We defeated fascism in Europe. You know, we cured polio and all these things, but we don't judge, and we shouldn't judge America by our accomplishments. We judge America by our possibilities. And we have right now in this moment, the possibility to turn the corner, to live up to the values that we purport, that all men and women are created equal. We have an opportunity to live up to the values that we purport, that this country is for everyone. This is my land. This is your land. This land is for all of us. We have the opportunity right now to truly be the land of the free. We have these opportunities. They are within our grasp, but it's up to us to take the steps to reach them, because change is hard. The arc of the universe bends long, but it bends towards justice. And it's up to us to grab that justice. It's up to us to do what is right. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my favorite people in the world. And he said the time to do what's right is always now, not 10 years from now. Not my children should be having these conversations that my grandmother, who was a sharecropper in rural Mississippi, had. No, the time for us to get this right is now, because we are running out of time. 400 years is a long time to be oppressed. Black people know it. 100 years is a long time to be oppressed. A day is a long time to be oppressed. 8 minutes is too damn long to have a knee on your neck, and all of that is true. So let us in this moment stand together as a collective voice, and let us ring out and say that we will not any longer put up with a government that does not serve the people. We will no longer put up with a government that puts the needs of the corporations before those. We will no longer put up with a government that says that military tanks can roll through our street, and we will no longer put up with politicians who are running to be politicians. I and everybody else on this panel is running to be a public servant, so we will serve the public. I thank you, all you journalists and everybody who tuned in, for your time. Go to IsaiahForCongress.com and join our movement, because this movement is just that. It's a movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Semelise, we'll end with you.
Yeah, and I just want to end by saying that Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter here in the United States of America. They matter all over the world. And this is why we're here. This is why we all came together to honor that. And in terms of where you can get information about our campaign and our policies, and, I also want to, shout out the fact that our team has translated our website into 4 different languages. So it's not only in English, it's in Spanish, it's in French, it's in Bangla, and it's in Arabic as well. So that every corner of the district can get a sense of what we're trying to fight for. We're centering the working class in everything that we do. We're taking on big money in politics. We're challenging the status quo here in New York State and beyond. We're fighting for environmental justice for our communities, taking leadership and guidance from the existing environmental justice space that has bared the brunt of environmental justice for too long. We're fighting to end homelessness. We're fighting for domestic workers. We're fighting to reform the criminal justice conversation. We're fighting for undocumented brothers and sisters. We're fighting for reproductive justice. And, we're doing it with the support of people here in the community, not taking a dime of luxury real estate developer money. Because it's been said before, this congressional district is experiencing a gentrification and a displacement crisis. And we cannot afford to continue to send people to Washington and places of power where they're more accountable to the donors that put them there and not the community. So this is an opportunity for us to stand by each of the candidates that you heard from today, and abroad and, like here in the United States, to make sure that, we're fighting to put people in office that are going to fight for the voices of the oppressed and the movement space, and that are going to create an intentional space for people to be seen and heard in a way that they haven't been seen. And leaders that are rooted in the pain of their communities. Those are the people that need to be in positions of power. People that are not going to forget where they come from, what their struggles were, why their family member is suffering. And we need to continue to use this space as a way of building genuine community that is always informed by love and empathy, because love and empathy is the most revolutionary thing that we can do right now in our communities in this country. Our country needs love right now to come together. And, I just want to end it with that and just let people know to follow our website at lopezforthepeople.com if you want to volunteer, if you want to help us make calls to check up on people in the community as we, put our mutual aid project forth and give groceries to people that are hungry. Sign up at lopezforthepeople.com. Y para las personas que no hablan inglés, mi nombre es Semelise López y me estoy postulando para ser la próxima congresista en el Distrito 15 Congressional del Sur del Bronx. Muchas gracias. And pa'lante.
Hold on, Solidarity. That ain't fair. My wife's Puerto Rican. I'll call her out the room right now.
So you know.
Yeah, she can give us a message in Spanish. I'll call her right now to help.
La lucha sigue siempre.
Thank you, Corey, Shahid, and Isaiah. It's an honor to share this space with you.
This was much needed, and I appreciate Shahid's team so much for getting all this together. Thank you, brother.
Thanks to y'all. We're all in this together. Stay strong. Hope to see you again soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, maybe we can ungo live now and then have a